see us?
Yeah.
We're good on YouTube? All right, thanks. Hey, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be here with Stephen Donziger. Stephen has been under house arrest here in his home in New York City for over 2 years at this point. I've interviewed Stephen before. We've covered support rallies for Stephen, and it's a very, very long, convoluted story, but it's also, in a way, a bit of a simple story if you really read into it. So, before we get into what's coming, because Stephen has been, in my view, very wrongly convicted of a misdemeanor charge that, in New York history, has been no longer than 90 days. 90 days, I think, under house arrest?
Or house arrest.
90 days under house arrest. I just wanted to, I've seen a lot of interviews you've done, but I've never asked you kind of the beginning stages of what got you involved with, fighting on behalf of these Ecuadorians who were poisoned, basically, by Chevron.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I got involved as a young lawyer in 1993. I was invited to go in a delegation with other lawyers and some scientists to investigate what we had heard was a terrible environmental catastrophe in Ecuador's Amazon, in an area where Texaco had drilled. We went down there and witnessed what looked like an apocalyptic nightmare. I mean, there were lakes of oil on the floor of the jungle. There were hundreds and hundreds of waste pits that Texaco had gouged out of the jungle floor. They had run pipes from the waste pits to rivers and streams that local people were using for their drinking water, their bathing, and their fishing. It was a crisis of epic proportions. It was obvious just looking at it with the naked eye. We decided to do something about it. So we were hired by some local people down there to sue Texaco back in U.S. courts where these decisions were made, citing their headquarters here in New York, which is what we did. And that so began what's become a 28-year journey that led to a hugely successful judgment against Chevron, which had bought Texaco, in Ecuador's courts where they wanted the trial to be held, where they had accepted jurisdiction. And then that led to them retaliating against me because they didn't want to pay the people of Ecuador. They sued me here in New York for fraud for $60 billion, the largest amount that anyone has ever been sued for in the United States. And I live in a 2-bedroom apartment where we're standing right now. Ultimately, the judgment against them was affirmed by 28 appellate judges, 6 appellate courts, including the Supreme Courts of Ecuador and Canada. But they persisted in going after me here before what I believe is a dishonest U.S. federal judge, Louis Kaplan, who denied me a jury and let Chevron present false witness testimony from a guy they paid $2 million to, and he claimed he was in a meeting where I offered a bribe. There was no evidence I ever offered a bribe. It's not true.
I wanted to drill in on that.
Yeah.
Like, they used racketeering charges,
Yes.
which is kind of like RICO.
Mm-hmm.
They go after, think about The Sopranos.
It's a law designed to target the mafia.
And it's not like you have to show a lot of evidence in general for racketeering, RICO, those kind of cases.
You have to show conspiracy
right.
with various predicate offenses, and what they did is they tried to paint the team of people that had worked to hold Chevron accountable as lawyers and scientists and advocates as some sort of racketeering conspiracy similar to the mafia.
Mm-hmm. With
the idea that the entire lawsuit, the purpose of it was to extort money from Chevron. I mean, can you imagine? Like, it's incontrovertible that Chevron dumped literally 16 billion gallons of cancer-causing oil waste into Ecuador. I mean, they admit it. It was confirmed by multiple courts in Ecuador, and they try to play the role of victim so they don't have to pay the people of Ecuador. They went after the team, and they claimed that I was the head of the team, therefore I was the mastermind of what they called a conspiracy. No one was ever charged with a crime. This all a civil lawsuit they filed against me.
And the only really evidence they had was this Ecuadorian judge that they paid for him and his family to move here. They rehearsed with him 53 times.
53 days.
53 days they rehearsed with him.
Yeah, and he came in and testified falsely. He later admitted he lied repeatedly on the stand, but Judge Kaplan, who's a former tobacco industry lawyer, without a jury, claimed that I committed all sorts of felonies in a civil case. So it was a tricked up process by Chevron. They basically got a judge in a civil case to find that I committed criminal offenses, and in doing it, they denied me a jury. They denied me my due process rights, and now they have this judgment, which is kind of crazy, and they go around the world saying, oh, a judge found that he, committed bribery and extortion. In the meantime, 28 other appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada have affirmed the validity of the Ecuador judgment that I fought many years to help my clients obtain. So you really have one U.S. trial judge, who's a former tobacco lawyer, against 28 appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada, who have sided with our team to reject this ridiculous false witness testimony from a man named Alberto Guerra, who's an Ecuadorian man to whom Chevron has paid millions of dollars. They moved him up here, coached him for the 53 days, as you said, and he went into court and told a big lie about me. Based on that, Kaplan ruled against us and claimed that we could not enforce the Ecuador judgment in the United States. But that still doesn't end Chevron's risk, because Chevron has assets in dozens and dozens of countries around the world, and the Ecuadorians have other lawyers who are helping them pursue those assets in order to force Chevron to comply with the rule of law and comply with the Ecuador judgment.
And, I mean, just from a basic nobody's understanding of the law, I thought that when a witness recants or their story changes, at least you see in the movies and things like that, in many cases could set innocent people free who were already in prison. But this witness said he lied, but somehow this has continued going in motion.
I believe Judge Kaplan knew he was lying, and it was obvious when he was on the stand. Why would you coach someone for 53 days, pay him millions of dollars? There's no corroborating evidence to his story. When a year later, he was under oath in another case, he admitted he had lied before Judge Kaplan. First of all, Judge Kaplan never should have allowed this case to proceed. I mean, the case was in Ecuador, for starters.
And a U.S. federal judge.
He's a U.S. federal judge.
A U.S. federal prosecutor refused
to prosecute me.
Right.
So Kaplan basically let Chevron prosecute me. And really, the bigger issue is really, I think, the privatization by Chevron of our system of justice to target its critics. They've been doing this against me for years, where Judge Kaplan lets them walk into court and prosecute me without a jury in a civil case, and later he imposed literally millions of dollars of court costs on me, forcing me to pay them money, pay Chevron money. Chevron makes $250 billion a year. I don't really have any money. I'm a human rights lawyer. But it was a way to try to bankrupt me so I couldn't work on the case. So on the theory that I owed them money, they asked Judge Kaplan to force me to give them my computer and cell phone, and that would violate attorney-client privilege and all sorts of privileges and legally protected confidences. And I told Judge Kaplan I couldn't do that. I wanted to appeal that order, which I did appeal it. While it was on appeal, that is, while I was appealing the lawfulness of clearly a legal order from Judge Kaplan, he charged me with criminal contempt of court for not complying with his illegal order while it was under appeal, and had me locked up.
Well, speaking of illegal, or just completely unusual, I want to drill into the fact that a federal prosecutor declined to prosecute you.
That's right.
And then in a very unusual step, which I've never heard of, Judge Kaplan outsourced to a private prosecutor to prosecute you.
Yes.
Basically on behalf of
in theory, on behalf of the government.
Right, and there were ties between these private prosecutors and Chevron.
That's exactly right. So basically what happened is, judges have the right to appoint a private prosecutor under very rare circumstances only. And in this case, Judge Kaplan took his charges to the regular prosecutor who refused to prosecute me, because I believe the prosecutor found the charges to be baseless. At that point, Kaplan should have dropped it. Instead, he appoints a private law firm called Seward & Kissel to prosecute me, and lets them be paid out of a court fund, basically a taxpayer-funded court fund, their hourly fees, which have now totaled $1 million for a misdemeanor case. He later discloses 7 months into it that they had Chevron as a client. So I'm being prosecuted by a Chevron law firm. The judge overseeing this contempt case is over my computer. Is Loretta Preska, who's a leader of the Federalist Society, which is a Chevron-funded, pro-business legal organization. So I'm being prosecuted by a Chevron lawyer. There's a Chevron-linked judge overseeing the case who denied me a jury. The main witnesses against me are Chevron lawyers, and it's a complete, in our opinion, it's a charade of a trial. It was. Judge Preska, who had already locked me up as a supposed flight risk on a misdemeanor, even though I have a wife and son, I never missed a court date, never had a single bar grievance complaint filed against me. She locked me up saying I would flee to Ecuador, which is preposterous. And I've been here for 2 years and 2 months. I mean, it's extraordinary. The longest sentence ever given a lawyer, convicted of my level of offense in New York, is 90 days of home confinement. Nobody's ever even been sent to jail for a day. And on October 1st, she's going to sentence me, and I believe she could plan to put me in jail. I hope she doesn't. We're going to go in there and ask her to release me on the theory that I've already served my time and then some. But she could put me in jail for up to 6 months.
And I don't want to wish this, but some legal experts I read said if you're sent to jail, even after that, they could put you on probation after the imprisonment, which could potentially come with further house arrest. Is that possible?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I hope not.
Right. Because it seems like they've done a lot of unusual,
I hope not.
extra legal things. So.
I mean, whatever it is, they can only give me 6 months more of time, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Jail or house or home confinement. I'm hoping she'll just let me go or let me come home.
Right.
You know, I don't want to go to jail. I want to continue with my human rights work, and I have a fabulous appeal. And I think the right thing to do at this point, given what's happened up to now, is to free me, and let's let the appeal play out. Because I believe I will be fully exonerated on the appeal.
I want to read, it was a 245-page judgment Judge Preska wrote. She said, contrary to Mr. Donziger's assertion that his conviction was, quote, preordained, the court finds him guilty on each count for one reason and one reason only. Mr. Donziger did that with which he is charged, period. So I don't know what she's referring to. Is she saying that you bribed a judge, even though there's no evidence of that, or that you did not hand over attorney-client privilege?
No, so the charge that I bribed the judge, which again has been rejected by 28 judges, was in the underlying racketeering case. The case where I face prison is a contempt case that grew out of that as a way for Chevron, I think, to disable my ability to be an advocate. Had me locked up because I was working in a way that posed huge risk to them. So when Judge Preska says that, I mean, I just disagree. I didn't turn over my computer and cell phone because I owed the privilege to my client. I had an ethical duty not to turn it over. And ultimately I've been exonerated on that or vindicated on that by the Court of Appeals. So there's never been a lawyer in U.S. history ever charged with criminal contempt of court for appealing what is a civil discovery order, which is what that was. Why am I the first? Why am I the first lawyer charged with a misdemeanor ever locked up pre-trial? Why am I the first lawyer charged with a misdemeanor ever facing prison? Why am I the first lawyer charged with civil racketeering by a private oil company denied a jury? Why am I the first person where the evidence against him is someone who's paid millions and millions of dollars? I've never seen a witness paid millions of dollars, paid anything. You can't pay witnesses in a rule of law country. So there's all these firsts that are very disturbing, and I believe what's really happening is Chevron and its lawyers, with the help of Judge Kaplan, are really tricking up the judicial system, abusing their power as a way to target me in retaliation for the fact I helped indigenous peoples in Ecuador win a big pollution judgment against Chevron.
Right. And I want to point out, totally different case, but I think it has parallels. I mean, there's been a Flint water criminal case going on now 5 years. There was an original special prosecutor. That team was removed by the current Michigan Attorney General. But currently speaking, they charged the former governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, with a misdemeanor. That's a whole other story. But the former governor's lawyers, army of lawyers, have basically made the criminal case, put the criminal case at a standstill because they have alleged that the prosecution against the governor has illegally, basically, obtained and used attorney-client privilege. So a judge in the case has basically stopped it to comb back through whether the prosecution has used attorney-client privilege. So in that case, at least, it's pretty high profile. I mean, the community was poisoned here. attorney-client privilege is delaying and reviewing whether any attorney-client privilege was improperly released, is basically delaying the prosecution right now. But in your case, you said, no, I'm not going to hand over my attorney-client devices, communications, and somehow that became a misdemeanor.
Well, I think the difference between the cases on that issue is, I would assume the judge in Snyder's case is doing his or her job correctly and looking at it objectively,
right.
Whereas I believe the judge in my case, Judge Kaplan, was really working directly with Chevron lawyers to facilitate a campaign by Chevron to demonize me and criminalize me. So, Judge Kaplan had very little, if any, regard for the privileges held by the people of Ecuador. I believe the indigenous peoples of Ecuador, these are privileges held by them.
Right.
And I owe an ethical duty to them to protect them, to
right.
protect their privileges. He didn't have any regard for the people of Ecuador at all.
Yeah, and I was pointing out by that comparison that in law, and I'm a lawyer, attorney-client privilege is sacrosanct.
It's sacrosanct.
It's supposed to be protected. So here in one high-profile case, at least the judge, I think he should be convicted and then some, the governor, but at least they are going through it because that's one of the highest tenets in law.
Well, yeah.
So I don't know why yours is different.
No matter how abominable the accused is, and obviously Governor Snyder, I think that in your reporting exposed these awful things that were done under his watch to the people of Flint. People have due process rights in a rule of law country, including the United States. And, I'm not commenting on anything other than the fact that when one is accused, he or she should have the protection of the law to put forth a case and to protect confidentiality. And in the case of a lawyer, attorney-client privilege, I never had that.
Right.
That did not happen in my case because I think Judge Kaplan acted more like a prosecutor than a judge.
And I want to ask you, because in her 245-page judgment, she also used the phrase that it's time for you to pay the piper, which, I don't know. I was going crazy during COVID, being in a tight New York City apartment, but at least I could go out and take a walk. So she's saying, you need to pay the piper, yet you've been, in my view, a corporate prisoner for over 2 years. In most cases, at sentencing, you'd get time served, maybe be released on probation or something. So why do you think it seems very not legal driven but personal driven by Judge Preska against you?
Yeah, so Judge Preska is a leader of the Federalist Society funded by Chevron. She has a history of almost always siding with corporate interests in her decisions. Time to pay the piper is frankly not a professional way to write up a decision. But if she wants to use that language, I'll say I've paid the piper. I've been here now for 2 years and 2 months, when the longest sentence is 90 days. So what does she mean, time to pay the piper? The piper's been paid 9 times over in my case, and I should be released immediately to pursue an appeal where I believe her decision, I believe there's a very good chance her conviction of me, again without a jury, where she wouldn't let me defend myself, wouldn't even let me get on the stand to tell my story. I believe that there's a very good chance that will be overturned. So, piper's been paid. I'm not guilty. Let's move on with it and stop the charade of using the excuse of this case. Again, I'm the first lawyer ever charged criminally with challenging a civil discovery order. Use this case to retaliate against me on behalf of Chevron, which is obviously what's happening.
And 67 legal groups, representing thousands of attorneys have urged her, coming up on October 1st, your sentencing, have urged her to let you go. And this comes, you've had, I believe, hundreds of laureates and others, long ago, not recently, but long ago, say you should be released. It just seems like a cacophony of the legal community has basically said what you're saying, yet nothing. And we should add, I'm sure we'll get into this more, the New York Times covered originally, between 2011 and 2014, they covered in depth, Chevron's charge against you, this and that. But somehow, years later, once you were put under house arrest, we're right down the street from the New York Times, they have not covered this at all.
There's been a total silence from the New York Times and other large media companies, from CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox. I mean, they have completely ignored the story. It's journalists like you and other independent journalists who covered it, and covered it well, and I thank you for that. Chevron's a major advertiser of the New York Times, and the New York Times' main lawyer on media issues is a guy named Ted Boutros Jr. He's a lawyer against me at the Gibson Dunn firm that coached the lying Chevron witness for 53 days.
Well, and I would also point out,
Yeah.
I don't know about currently, but one of the New York Times' largest investors was Carlos Slim, who is a Mexican billionaire and involved in the fossil fuel industry. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll also say there was a person on the board of the New York Times who was also simultaneously on the board of Chevron. So the Times is conflicted. They're ignoring the story. Chevron's a major advertiser, and they just won't cover a story where there's a major human rights violation imposed on a U.S. attorney, 30-minute walk from their newsroom, while they're covering all sorts of stories involving human rights violations all over the world. Mm-hmm. So, I've lost a lot of respect for the New York Times. I think it's just really weak of them, and to capitulate to Chevron in this way. I will say that, I have more support than I ever imagined I would get. 68 Nobel laureates, thousands of lawyers around the world have signed letters and petitions to Judge Preska urging my release. 6 congresspersons, including AOC and Jamie Raskin and Jim McGovern, Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, wrote a letter to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, demanding he take back my private prosecution from the Chevron law firm. He hasn't responded, unfortunately. I think the Biden administration needs to step up and do something about this. I think this is an issue that reflects on their lack of respect for attacks on human rights lawyers, and I think if they're really serious about climate, you can't lock up the lawyers who are on the front lines protecting the planet and holding polluters accountable, and that's me. So, Biden, Garland, Congress, generally Congress have really not been there on this issue, and I think Jerry Nadler's my congressman, who's been completely silent. By the way, his son works for Chevron law firm.
Shocker.
And it's an embarrassment. I mean, all 3 of my elected representatives here in New York, Nadler, Schumer, and Gillibrand, have been completely silent. They all receive donations, lots of donations from lawyers at Chevron's Gibson Dunn law firm, and they're all conflicted. And it's just another example of how the Congress has been, completely influenced to do nothing about an important issue by campaign donations.
Well, I think your case, in my experience, is very interconnected to what's going on the ground in a lot of these cities, states, rural areas, because from basically Keystone onward to Standing Rock, now with Line 3 in Minnesota, a lot of smaller fossil fuel projects, you basically had a not even hidden, basically coalition of police working on behalf of the oil companies, to basically terrorize environmental activists, indigenous, non-indigenous. There was just a story about Line 3, how the police have been using basically torture techniques on the water protectors there protesting Line 3. And in Standing Rock's case, I was there, and I literally saw the police basically launching grenades at unarmed people, pepper spray, rubber bullets at point-blank range, and then after the fact, the government under Trump paid back. Federal money went to this area in North Dakota for their legal enforcement, and you're seeing this kind of conglomeration. All the same pattern is on behalf of oil companies.
Yeah.
Chevron, Enbridge, Energy Transfer Partners. We know that local state officials, mostly Republicans, have been pushing to create laws to basically criminalize protests, where it would be, you'd be okay if you ran over a protester in some states. I mean, this is extremely dangerous because I think it really just boosts up this propaganda of eco-terrorism.
Well, I think you make an important point. I think what's happening to me, locking me up is very much part of the trend you're talking about. I mean, the fossil fuel industry has a lot of power and a lot of money, and they are spreading it around to change laws in a way that punish free speech, punish protesters, lock up lawyers who hold them accountable, make up charges, control the federal judiciary through the Federalist Society and through judicial appointments. I mean, it's extraordinary the amount of power they have. I don't think that's appropriate, in a democratic society for any industry to have that much power. I mean, in Line 3, the issue now in Minnesota with the pipeline, Enbridge is paying local police millions of dollars. And these are the police who are arresting indigenous peoples for trying to protect their own territory from the pipeline company. So, the privatization of public functions is an important issue for our society. You see that, with Enbridge at Line 3. You see that in my prosecution by Chevron, where they directly took control of the prosecutorial function. You're seeing it in the rainforest of Brazil and Ecuador, where the militaries of those countries are being loaned to the oil companies to act as private security to secure their investments. So you're seeing the privatization of public functions in lots of different places in our society. The most dangerous places are obviously police, courts. You're also seeing it in prisons. And I think it's just wrong, and I think it needs to be stopped. I mean, what's happening to me goes way beyond me. I mean, this really goes to what kind of society we want to have in the United States of America. I mean, if you have corporations prosecuting their adversaries, you do not live in a rule of law country. This is about, what's happening to me is about Chevron and the fossil fuel industry, in my opinion, intimidating lawyers and activists and advocates and not doing this kind of critically important work to save our planet. And, that's why they're trying to make such a big thing out of Steve Donziger. They want people to see what happens to me and to be scared so they don't do the work. And I would encourage people not to see what's happening to me that way. Really, I see what's happening to me as a function of our success. The people in Ecuador figured out a way to, work with lawyers from around the world, get financing so they can do a legal case, and they won the case. And because of that success, their lawyers, including me, are being attacked. So it's a sign of success. It's a sign that Chevron is feeling risk and feeling heat over this, as they should. And ultimately, I'm optimistic that the people of Ecuador will prevail, and I'll personally get through this situation that I'm in at the moment.
You mentioned the Biden administration. I want to drill down on that. Under Trump, rightfully so, there was a lot of, middle-class suburbanites who were outraged at the elite, frankly, completely breaking norms, in many cases seemingly illegal things. Even after his presidency, there are things coming out about how he tried to get reporters' emails and, all these things, breaking the First Amendment whenever he could. But Biden and Democrats strongly spoke out against this when Trump was president. But when Biden came in, and I'm not comparing you to Julian Assange, it's obviously different cases, they, against what former President Obama did, put their foot on the gas and continued the prosecution against Julian Assange. In your case, I mean, you already said it, they're doing nothing, even though this is not a low-profile, maybe the New York Times hasn't covered it, but they know about it. You've had politicians speak out on your behalf. Obviously, the Attorney General has a lot on his plate, but how could they, on one end, be attacking the Republicans and Trump for their, gross disregard for the law, but on the other end, we know what's going on with Assange, but, I mean, basically disregarding that a U.S. prosecutor declined to take this case. I know you got to be kind to them because you might need them to help you.
Yeah, but that's a very good question that needs to be answered. I mean, governing in an advanced capitalist society is complicated, and
it's one way of putting it.
Biden comes in promising all sorts of things, and he hits the ground, and there's countervailing forces at work, fueled by big money, and Congress is stuck and seemingly unable to move because of one or two people. It's complicated, but it doesn't change the fact that what's happening to me is simple. Like, it's a corporate prosecution. There's people all across the political spectrum who are offended by what's happening. I mean, even people who disagree with the idea of the work I do is important. People don't want corporate prosecutions. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, right-wing, progressive, whatever. It's just wrong. And there's a lot of people speaking out against this. And I think Merrick Garland, I know he's busy, I know he's new, but come on. Like, do you really want a country where your department turned down a prosecution and a judge has the power to appoint a law firm from the very company, that against whom the target has been litigating for years and years and won a big judgment. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Right.
And it should not be happening. So, look, we're still calling on Attorney General Garland and the Biden administration to do something, even though my sentencing is next week. It's never too late.
And I want to also drill in, this is not like a thing in the past.
Drill in, by the way, is an
not
interesting
drill
choice of
in.
words.
I also want to focus on, this is
Yeah.
not a thing in the past, you even mentioned, the poor indigenous Ecuadorians are still at risk of drilling oil.
Yeah, they have not been compensated for the judgment they won against Chevron, not even a penny. The BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico happened in 2010. 70 billion has been paid out to the victims. In Ecuador, for something that was much worse, much more delicate ecosystem, has lasted decades and decades. Not the first dollar has been paid. Chevron needs to pay up. I mean, that's the bottom line. People are dying. Indigenous groups are staving off extinction because of their pollution, and they poisoned a lot of people. Many already have died, and they need to comply with this judgment and pay money into a cleanup fund so the people affected can clean their lands.
Mm-hmm.
Without that, thousands more people are going to die in the coming years.
And I want to talk about the psychological aspect because, it seems clear to me the main reason they did this is to try and prevent future Stephen Donzigers and, make human rights attorneys, activists, think twice that you're going to be held, political prisoner in your home or what have you, maybe go to jail. In speaking in communications you've had, whatever you want to let on, has it had that effect? Have you seen this kind of steer people in your line of work away from doing it?
Not really, but you never know, right? I mean, how many people chose not to pursue this line of work because they're like, it's too much risk.
Because I know a lot of lawyers, based on my reporting on Amazon, who will not take a case against Amazon, even one that, Amazon the company, even though it's slam dunk for a lot of the reasons we're talking about.
A lot of these companies try to, do scorched earth litigation policies to discourage lawsuits.
Right.
Chevron's not the first, Amazon's not the last, and other companies do this, but you have to stand in there, continue fighting and not let them get away with it. But see, all of that is predicated on getting a fair court and a neutral judge.
And a jury.
And a jury. And in our case, the judge, again, was denied a jury and, really put his hand on the scales of justice in favor of Chevron.
Right.
Which really messed up the whole smart strategy we have. But I'll remind people, the people of Ecuador won the case. I mean, it's been affirmed by the Supreme Court of Ecuador, by the Constitutional Court of Ecuador, by the Supreme Court of Canada, for enforcement purposes. They won the case. 28 judges have affirmed the judgment in one form or another. Just because this one U.S. federal trial court judge is angry about it and is, going after the judgment as a way to help protect a major U.S. company and has targeted me in furtherance of that strategy, doesn't mean overall that the people didn't win. I mean, this would not be happening had they not won.
Right.
I mean, they wouldn't care.
And I want to ask, I assume being under house arrest, you watched the little TV. It's kind of maddening to me. You said, capital politics, government is complicated. It's kind of maddening to me. We're looking at what's going on right now with this back and forth about a $3.5 trillion deal, which has a lot of good climate proposals in it. It's interesting to me that the media always frames people like Joe Manchin and others as kind of like centrist or moderates, when any good reporting, easily findable. The Intercept just did a great report. Joe Manchin has made upwards of $5 million in 10 years from the coal companies he founded. Stock options upward between 1 and 5, an extra 1 and 5 billion. It's not just Manchin. Democrats like Manchin, other Democrats, a lot of Republicans. I want to talk about like the fossil fuel industry. They have captured so much of our government, but the media, they've too captured. So it's like the supposed gatekeepers or the representatives are stepping aside, and it seems that the fossil fuel industry has full reign to severely water down legislation or block it completely, set the narrative for news media.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, I have to go in a couple of minutes. Let me just say this. The fossil fuel industry gives tens of millions of dollars every year to the Congress, to senators, to representatives. Nancy Pelosi out of San Francisco, that's Chevron's headquarters, gets a lot of money from Chevron. Both senators in California get a lot of money from Chevron. there's a real fear to do things that would undermine, donors, frankly. And you see this at the New York Times. There's a real fear to undermine a big advertiser like Chevron. So you basically have the very institutions that are designed to check corporate power, the Congress, the so-called free press, that have completely been undermined, and I would say corrupted, by money from the very forces that are undermining our democracy. And you see this time and time again. I mean, Chevron was funding the organization that was tweeting and encouraging people to march on the Capitol January 6th. Okay? Now, if you ask Chevron, would you support an insurrection? Of course they'd say no. But they have so much money out there and so many different groups, they've just lost control of the situation. They're just funding this right-wing anger as a way to destabilize our government, to destabilize our democracy, so they can take advantage, I believe, of the chaos. And part of what they've accomplished with this strategy, it's a money strategy. The Koch brothers were behind it, and the Koch brothers funding network has been instrumental. That includes the Chevrons and the Exxons of the world. Is they've been able to, I think, to a great degree, take over our federal judiciary. And when people are out there like today, there's big climate marches all over the country for kids. You can do all these things, but why does it seem like nothing ever really changes? Why is it that the fossil fuel industry, in an era of the planet burning up, seems to actually be gaining power, political power at least, as opposed to losing it? Why isn't there a plan to phase out an industry that's going to kill us all unless they stop drilling and polluting? It's because of the money and the power, and the people in positions to make decisions in our society about these critical issues that affect the future of so many people are compromised by the force of these private monies, And what's happening to me is an example of how much power they've accumulated in recent years. I don't think you could prosecute someone privately. A corporation could at least, even 10 years ago. Not 20 years ago. Not when I was a young lawyer out of law school. No way. Why is it happening now? It's happening because the federal judiciary is running it. And because, our institutions of government that are supposed to check corporate power have become captive to much of corporate power. And that's a real problem.
Last question. Obviously, 2 years under house arrest has to be mentally tough. It's been tough on your family. You have a teenage son, I think. So October 1st is sentencing. I don't want to predict anything, but from Judge Preska's ruling and the 245-page judgment behind it, I'm not optimistic. I don't know about you, but technically you're having a rally in support of being let free on October 1st. But technically, during that rally, you could technically go to jail. That's what's at stake.
Well, after the rally, we go into court and be sentenced.
Right.
And she gets sentenced to prison, no doubt.
Yeah.
I'm hoping she won't. Again, no one at my level of offense in the federal system, for a first-time offender on this kind of charge, even if I was guilty and I'm not, is ever going to put in jail for criminal contempt. And she shouldn't do it. And I hope she doesn't. I'm going in there with, in good faith. My lawyers will ask her to consider all the factors, including the fact I have dozens of people vouching for my integrity and my character, my professionalism, and we're hoping she'll do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And we're hoping for the best.
And we'll be back here on the 1st for that rally, and obviously report on it. Thank you for taking the time. I know that I wish you had a lot more media attention, just like.
Thank you for coming and doing what you can. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. If you like this reporting, support us. StatusCoup.com/join. Become a member. $5 a month. Take it from me. Not easy to afford independent journalism without being bought off by corporations, but we're doing our best. StatusCoup.com/join. I'll see you on Monday. Thanks.